Thank you all for joining us for our Demystifying Systemic SEL webinar series, where we have been digging into these 10 key elements that help integrate SEL throughout our education systems. Hopefully, many of you joined us for our first two webinars, the first one on explicit SEL instruction and the second one on integration into academics. If not, you can view these recordings on our website. Today, we're going to be digging into student voice and engagement. So before we get into this, I'd love to hear from you. What does student voice and engagement mean to you? You can go ahead and drop some ideas into the chat. Autonomy, representation, sense of belonging, empowerment, love all of these responses, agency, inclusion. That's great. Lots of great ideas, and we agree that student voice has to do with all of these things. When we think about student voice, they really are intertwined with social and emotional learning for a number of really important reasons. There are significant benefits to the school and to the student when we elevate student voice. From the school, when we provide our young people with opportunities to use their voice, district and school leaders get to tap into the knowledge and expertise of the young people, and they have a unique and essential perspective on their own education that we really need to listen to. And of course, there's benefits to the students too. When we give them opportunities to offer their perspectives, to share in decision-making, and to initiate and actually lead the action, the youth feel like they're heard and valued, and that can improve motivation, their interest, their engagement, and their overall learning. But in order to make this happen, it's up to us, the adults, to make sure that we're providing that time, the opportunities, and the encouragement so that the youth can use their voice. So let's talk for a minute about how this actually works. How does youth voice work with social and emotional skills? So when you actually do elevate your own voice, we are really fostering all 5 of the CASEL competencies. They have to rely on their social and emotional learning competencies to do this. So starting with self-awareness, when you're elevating your voice as a young person, you're having to really reflect on what you think, develop your confidence and your self-efficacy to express yourself, to actually feel comfortable talking to peers, to groups, to adults, and really gaining that awareness of who you are and your sense of yourself and your voice. In self-management, this is really about practicing the opportunity to organize your thoughts, to use your voice effectively, to know when to speak up and when to sit back and let others talk. Really about managing your impulses and your behavior is all part of self-management. In social awareness, that's where we know that for youth voice, they really need to listen to the perspectives of others and factor those perspectives in so that when they're elevating their voice, they can do that effectively and understanding that what is the best way to communicate with this particular audience, given what I understand about them, so that I can be effective in using my voice. Relationship skills are also really important, obviously, because students are practicing problem solving in groups and understanding shared ideas and solutions for working on shared goals. And then, of course, responsible decision-making is critically important because the idea is that youth are really thinking about the challenges and working together in collaborative problem-solving opportunities to solve those challenges for themselves, for their schools, and for their community. So you can see that youth voice opportunities are elevating all 5 of those social and emotional competencies in really important ways and benefiting not just the students, but the schools in which they are. So let's stop for a minute and watch an example from a video of elevating youth voice as part of the systemic approach.
Just as the students have a voice in school culture, they are also part of the classroom decision-making process about learning activities.
We are student-led. That lesson was not created by me. The scholars told me what to do, and they told me when to stop reading and when to turn to the next page, and they presented it.
We want to continue with the important content of the academics. Obviously, that is key to what a school system needs to do, but it's the approach. Are we making our young people feel welcome in the classroom? Do they feel part of a group? Are they able to work on problem-based learning? Is there collaboration and small group discussion? Student voice is extremely important in this process. So we want the very important content, but at the same time, the how we get it across is extremely important. Are we including all of our young people in our decision making?
So before we get into our guest today, which I know everyone's excited to hear from, we want to talk for a minute about the ways in which youth voice can be elevated in elementary, middle, and high school. We know sometimes people think about youth voice and they think about the oldest students in the education system, but there are actually some really important ways that we can begin to scaffold youth voice opportunities and provide opportunities even for our youngest learners. In the elementary school, we can engage all of our students in creating shared agreements for how they want the classroom to feel and to be, and what they think are important ways to maintain that environment. We also know that even kids as young as kindergarten can lead circle time or morning meetings and really learn to be a leader. We know that young kids also can benefit from getting opportunities to ask and answer questions and having young people's voices as present as the adults in all those learning opportunities. Giving kids explicit instruction on how to ask for help and how to offer help when they see someone else needs help are great ways to practice youth voice skills and promote social and emotional awareness. And always asking our kids, even our youngest kids, about their feedback on lessons. What did they like about this lesson we just did? What would they like to see more of? What part didn't make sense to them? And really getting their feedback on lessons instead of just assuming that everything we're teaching is working for everyone. And always involving our kids, even our youngest kids, in those parent-teacher conferences, having them think about what do they think is important to elevate in the conversation, and be active listeners and participants in those conversations. You can do this with even the youngest kids. In middle school, not only do all of those things we just talked about apply, but we can also really have students engage meaningfully in classroom instruction on a regular basis. Project-based learning is something that we know is a great opportunity, and you saw that in the video, for elevating the perspectives of all students and having them practice that critical collaborative problem-solving skills, which is so important. We also know that in middle school, it's appropriate to begin engaging our young people as full members on SEL teams or other school improvement teams, asking students to reflect on data. So not only are we doing climate surveys and getting their opinions, but asking the young people what they think about the results and places where they think we can make changes and what those changes might be. Also giving them ownership over disciplinary processes through, for example, restorative practices is a great way to engage kids and have them feel like they are part of the solution. In high school, we definitely want to make sure that we are giving our opportunities to our young people to be leaders in many of the ways we already talked about, but even in ways like youth participatory action research, so that they can actually examine and lead research into topics that matter to them and their communities. We also want to make sure that we are giving our students opportunities to be a part of professional learning opportunities for teachers, so that teachers can actually hear from students around some of the things that they're learning about in their own professional learning. And really including our students in leadership communities, such as the SEL team, but also the hiring committees or even the school board. And in fact, the guests that we're going to be talking about today are going to be sharing exactly that. So with no further ado, let's talk. I'd love to introduce you to Dr. Adrienne Battle and Ebenezer Hale. Dr. Battle is the Director of Schools in Metro Nashville Public Schools. And she not only was a student in Metro Nashville Public Schools, but she has also been a teacher, an assistant principal, a coach of principals, a regional superintendent, and eventually the director of schools in 2020. And we are thrilled to have her here today. Welcome, Dr. Battle. And we are especially thrilled to have Ebenezer Hale with us today. He sits on the School Board of Education as a member, and he's a student at Martin Luther King Jr. Magnet High School. He was actually born in Ethiopia, and he's been a Nashville student for 10 years. He attended Carter Lawrence and Una Elementary Schools and Rosa Park Magnet Math and Science Middle School before entering Martin Luther King, and he will graduate in 2023. He is serving a 2-year term on the school board. Welcome, Ebenezer. We're thrilled to have you both. So let's go ahead and get started. Dr. Battle, I'd love to start with you. If you can just share with us a little bit about your sort of approach to youth voice in Nashville, sort of generally, and why that's important to you as the leader of the district to make sure that that's a priority.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here, having us here this morning, and for everyone who's joining the conversation. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And as I think about that question that was asked, simply put, our students are why we're here. They're the heart of everything that we do as educators in Metro Nashville Public Schools, and of course, all across the country. And so when you think about that, and when you keep your students at the core of what you do every single day, you will elevate student voice and have them engaged in as many ways as possible as they prepare for their futures. Here in Nashville, we have a commitment to our students and a mantra, a mission that we live by every day, and that is every student known. And we're trying to make sure that that is integrated into everything that we do, as well as our decision making. And when you think about every student known, you can't just say it, right? You have to think about what that really means. What will our students experience? What will be their opportunities for us to know them well? And part of that is knowing what's on their minds. What are they thinking? What are the challenges? What are their concerns? And quite frankly, in a lot of ways, what are their thoughts about how we can resolve or at least move the needle on some of our most challenging problems or gaps that we're seeing in either performance or opportunities for students all across the board. And so we've been very intentional about thinking about our integrated support model. As you've mentioned already, the core of our SEL competencies are integrated into our academics. That is our goal, for our students to experience that integration on a daily basis. So as we're thinking about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, we're thinking about the structures of support, not only for our teachers, but for our leaders in our buildings, for our support hub staff, which is our version of our district office. We refer to ourselves as a support hub because that's what we're here to do. We're here to support our students, our teachers, and our schools towards success. And we know that if we are integrating those competencies in what we do every day, we will increase things like the rigor that our students are experiencing, the relevance that we want them to have, building positive relationships to ensure that they're ready for their K-12 experience and their post-secondary opportunities. So it is everything to us because we're trying to model and live by every student known every day. And that means we have to be intentional about picking the brains of our students, giving them leadership opportunities, and allowing their voices to be heard.
Great. And I know we're going to be talking a little bit more today about the Ebenezer, your role on the Nashville School Board. Why don't we have you share a little bit about your role there and kind of how that came to be and your process and what that experience has been like?
Yeah, thank you. So in the beginning, when the position was open and was announced, I remember I just I read the description. It was posted all over the MMPS social media, and a lot of the traits that were mentioned in that description that a student member should have are traits that you would normally identify with an MMPS student, which is someone that wants to help out their community, wants to use their voice to fight for something that they believe in, and also represent a large group of people. And it seemed like it was an easy choice to apply. And I remember a lot of my friends were talking about it too, and they all wanted to apply because it seemed like that was a position that was made for MMPS student, for someone that grew up in the district. And I remember when I applied and I did the interview, everybody was very welcoming. And even after doing the interview, I kept thinking, I know I did great, but they were so nice. I feel like, everybody's going to feel like that, because the people that were interviewing me, they were also members of the district, not just people that are working with the board, but people that are working in other aspects of the district. So we had some teachers, I think, some coaches, and it just felt like it was the whole district coming to pick someone that could represent, the student body. And then after getting the position, and this is a question that I've been asked a lot, which is, how has that position, affected you? And I could basically say that it's been an eye-opening experience, because when you have a leader or a director of school whose main mantra or whose main goal is to make every student known, then sometimes you feel like you're in the middle of all the spotlight, and all the attention is being given to you, and everybody just wants to hear what you want to say, which makes the position a lot easier, because my whole job has always been just to give the people that I work with, or give the people that I go to school with, a voice so that they have a say in what's going on and around them. And it basically made my job, really easy. I show up to meetings, I listen, I'm asked for my opinion. And sometimes, even when if sometimes I feel a little quiet, they'll still come to me and ask me how I feel about certain topics. And it feels like there's a big outreach to get that student voice, in different ways. And even if sometimes, if I don't agree with a certain topic that's happening, it's not just left that as, oh, Ebenezer doesn't agree. It's also, why doesn't he agree? Why don't most students agree? And we hold separate meetings after our main meetings to discuss more on solutions that we could have, so that everybody's happy and everybody's involved with their district.
Great. And so Dr. Battle, how did you start this program where students were part of the school board, and how did the school board in Nashville come to the agreement that this was going to be a priority, and how did you handle even getting started, so that some of our listeners can figure out how they might learn from your experience in Nashville?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to give a lot of credit to my school board. They have really embraced our mission around every student known. We really were trying to dig deep, particularly as we were navigating the pandemic that affected all of us across the country. We wanted to know in what ways could we better leverage voices, particularly when we were in a virtual space, right? So how do you do that? What are those structures? What are the communications needed? So again, lots of credit to my school board, who embraced every student known, and recommitted ourselves, particularly to the student board member process. We had a few goes at it in years past, but in this way, we were really grounded in what we wanted in a description and of our student school board members, as Ebenezer mentioned. And so they came together and really thought about the process, how we wanted to support our school board members, our student school board members, the orientation process, how we would value their voices along the way. And so it's been really easy in that regard, because all of our school board members are on board with having the students a part of the conversation. And I think our student school board members would also attest that our support hub members and leaders all across the district are cheering them on and really valuing their voices as they come to the table at school board meetings, but also in other ways as well. I mean, Ebenezer will likely talk about other cabinet meetings we have with other students, how we came together as we were navigating the pandemic and making very tough decisions around what it would look like for Metro Nashville Public Schools moving forward. And quite frankly, they led the way. Once we heard from our student board members and the information that they were bringing back from their peers, it was a very easy decision on what we needed to do moving forward and how we wanted to be responsive to their needs. So a very long process. I think one piece of advice I would have is being very intentional in the beginning, planning, thinking about the timelines, thinking about what we have as a junior serving and a senior serving. So there's a 2-year rotation. So they get lots of experiences and we have a seamless transition as our students graduate.
Great. And yeah, Ebenezer, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you are not just representing other students, but also how you're collaborating with other students to make sure that not just you and your other sort of co-board members' voices are heard, but that we get even more students' voices at the table.
Yeah, like you said, because I work on the board, which means that I not only represent the people that I go to school with, but also all the other high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. I've had the privilege of working with people that I don't normally interact with, working with students that I don't normally interact with. And a lot of people actually reach out to me because the fact that the board has someone on there that's a student shows other kids that, you know, they have that ability to, there's the bridge now between them and the administration, that they have someone that, you know, they can reach out to who will make sure that whatever grievances or whatever that they want to say to the board can be said to the board. And a lot of the times I just get people that email me because a lot of my social media and my contacts are out there. So people have that ability to reach out to me, that email me to ask me questions about, you know, from things like why school closed on this specific day to main questions that revolve around, you know, the pandemic or masks or anything that's a bigger topic. And what that showed me is that the importance that representation has, not only for adults, but also for students, because as soon as, you know, people started or students started hearing about 2 students being on the board, you know, sitting there to represent them, they started to pay attention to more of what's going on in their district. They started to pay attention more of what's happening around these conversations, what are happening in board meetings. And sometimes, you know, our board meetings are on Tuesdays. So on Wednesdays, I have students that come up to me and ask me about what happened during those board meetings, which is something that's really nice to see.
That's amazing, because you having a role on the school board is actually really encouraging other students to use their voice too, when they see that there's that bridge, and they also, their youth voice and their social emotional competence is also improved by knowing that you're there to represent them. So Metro Nashville is a huge school district. Dr. Battle, how many students are in Metro Nashville?
We have over 80,000 students that we serve.
So 80,000 students that you're representing, Ebenezer, how do you manage all of the input that you must be getting with people's ideas? Like, do you work with your partner to figure out which issues you want to elevate, or how does that work?
So before I even applied for the position, the district already had ways for students to reach out to them with their opinions. We have these panorama surveys. We also have what we call our Navigator. So there are a lot of steps for students to reach out to districts. All I had to do was, you know, tap into those methods, and my job was very easy. And another thing that you mentioned was my partner, who's Angeli. She's very savvy with technology, and she has this ability to you know, quickly come up with a way to reach out to a lot of people. And what we've done is, when there's a specific issue that comes up, we design a survey and we try our best to get that survey, you know, disseminated throughout the district so that multiple people can fill it out. And then me and her go through that survey, and what we see that's relevant to that topic, we bring to either Dr. Battle's team or the board or some of our board members.
Oh, wow. Well, it sounds like you have a lot of processes in place that support your ability to represent so many students. So I'd love to hear kind of a specific story, maybe. Ebenezer, we'll start with you. A story of an issue that either you all brought to the school board, or that you engaged in as part of the discussion that felt like your input may have changed the direction of the decision or had a significant influence on that decision.
The first thing that comes to mind was the conversation we had around masks and whether we should be removing the mask mandate that we have in the district, you know, post our spring break. And I remember me and Angeli were against the removing of that mask mandate in the first place because we just felt like it might have been too soon. And we decided that the best option would have been to conduct a survey for students to see where they're at, to see, you know, where their family is at, and if they feel comfortable with, you know, the mask being removed. And in the end, the mask mandate was removed and we moved to optional. But the nice thing that me and Angeli saw was that after that mask mandate was removed, it wasn't just left that, oh, they didn't agree, but it still happened. It was Dr. Battle and her team contacting us, setting up a date where we can have a meeting with her and her executive directors. We went over these PowerPoint slides that Angeli, I, and some of her team created together, in which we discussed how students were feeling, what we thought were solutions to some of the discomfort that students might have.
Great. And Dr. Battle, how has having these young people on the board kind of changed the dynamics of the board meeting, or sort of how things are working there?
Oh yes, we listen to our students, and that
even more than each other.
we do, and the school board members take up some very challenging topics often. And what's great about having the student board members present is it's a reminder that our decisions should be grounded in what's best for our students. And so we've got to think about them individually. We do have to think about them collectively as well, but it is a constant reminder that that's why we're all here, and they should be the core and the focus. And so when our conversations tend to veer away from being student focused, it's easy to bring it back because of their physical representation, but also taking into account their feedback and their voice around those particular topics. And I will add to Ebenezer, there was probably the example I would have gone to as well, Ebenezer, and what he's very humble, but what he didn't share was all of our strategies moving forward came straight from Ebenezer, Angeli, and our students. They guided myself and my team operationally on what students were feeling, what their concerns were, and how we could be most responsive as we transitioned with our mask optional policy. And so I thank them for taking the initiative and surveying and reaching out to students, but also being willing to sit with us in a time where there was lots of tension around it to figure out how do we move forward in the best interest of all of our students.
Great. So I'd love to also think about ways that youth can engage in Nashville, or even ideas that you have for how they might engage that haven't been implemented yet. Ebenezer, you're clearly an exceptional student. You went through a rigorous process to be selected to represent your students in this really important and public way. But that's 1 or 2 students out of 80,000. What are some ideas that you would have for ways the district, you can either share things that they're already doing or things they could be doing to engage either younger students or also students who maybe don't raise their hand, who are kind of quiet, but definitely have opinions? How do we get more perspectives and more opportunities for youth to share their opinion either in their classroom or their school or the district?
So most of the time when we think about leadership, I think there's this wrong idea that some people are just born with that leadership trait and some aren't, which isn't necessarily the trait. I think you mentioned it earlier before the introduction, which is that it's very important to start mentioning leadership and being people that are important members of community at the very small level of elementary school and preschools. And when you give those students at that small level an environment in which they feel comfortable enough to speak out about things that they feel, then when they get into those higher stages of high school and even college, they have that ground or that foundation where they can speak on almost anything that they want with confidence. And the only thing that they would need is those opportunities like mentioned. So for example, Dr. Battle mentioned it earlier, but she has a cabinet comprised of students from different high schools throughout the district. And they meet on Thursdays and they discuss issues or they discuss things that those cabinet members have seen. And that information goes directly to Dr. Battle and her team. And I've had the privilege of attending those meetings, and it shows that it's not just a handful of students in MMPS that have the traits. It's everybody has the traits. It's more of, who's the one who gets those opportunities to speak out. And then when you look at the city itself, I've had the privilege of working for some companies or along with some companies or some other programs. For example, Angeli and I were invited to work with the Chamber of Commerce to speak with some of the businesses in Nashville and to tell them how they could best help the student and the district itself. So it's more of giving those students the platform they need to speak. And, as long as they have that foundation set from that young age, I feel like every student has that ability to speak on whatever they choose to.
Wow, that's amazing that you are able to also engage outside of the school in a leadership role and really help the business community understand needs of kids as well. And I think you pointed out a really important piece which is helping those young kids feel comfortable. Here at Castle, we talk a lot about the education environment as fostering a sense of belonging and doing what we can so that kids feel that level of safety and comfort to take risks, to raise their hand, to ask for help, and to practice even at the earliest ages. That sense of belonging is such an important foundation for feeling comfortable enough to use your voice. And when you use it, having it affirmed the way that it seems like you have had. Dr. Battle, can you share about some structures in place for the earliest learners in Nashville? Like, how are you preparing your youngest learners with youth voice opportunities?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I'm going to start first with just the intentional effort we've placed around what we call our focused outcomes. If you look at our focused outcomes as a district, we've broken them down by tier. They're grade specific, and we call out our social emotional learning competencies that we are intentional around building out district-wide structures for. So, for example, and Ebenezer spoke on a few of these. We survey all of our students. We have ambassadors at every grade level. We started ambassadors at the high school level. Now we have ambassadors in the middle schools and in our elementary schools as well. And one of the things that we've invested in this school year in particular is that we now have advocacy centers in every elementary school in Metro Nashville Public Schools. And this is a space where we have advocacy coaches who are working with students on these SEL competencies, particularly around self-management, but in a very proactive way. We're intentional about building that toolbox for our students so they know and have been taught how to respond to difficult situations and how to self-regulate, if you will. And so those are a few examples. We are moving more into the project-based learning experiences as early as the elementary school space. We now have smaller learning communities in our elementary schools because, again, with this mantra of every student known, we have to be intentional about making sure students have adults that are surrounding them, that know them, and can make sure that they have these platforms and avenues by which to share their opinions, to advocate for themselves, so on and so forth. And one other intentional innovation that we've been implementing is our Navigator Program. Every Metro Nashville Public School student has an adult assigned to them. And that adult stays with them over the course of their tier experience. And it's our responsibility as adults to check in. Right? We proactively check in with every student. We did this in person, we did this virtually to make sure our students know how to navigate. They know they have someone that's cheering them on. They have someone that keeps them inspired and motivated and can connect them to the right supports and resources. And we don't want to take that for granted. Starting with our pre-K students, our kindergarten students, we don't want to take that for granted. We want to make sure that they know that all the opportunities exist, their voices matter, they matter to us. And if we can continue this investment in deepening our practices, I just can't imagine the types of students will be graduating as seniors in high schools, but we're starting early. So we're seeing that through line all the way from elementary to high school, as you mentioned, restorative practice assistants. So our students are starting early with advocacy centers, experiencing restorative practices assistants and peace centers in middle school and high school as well.
That's great. And a couple of things I wanted to just emphasize that you just said. First, with the self-management piece, sometimes people think of self-management and they think of sort of, behavior control, but actually self-management is way beyond regulating your emotions or impulses, but also that's where we develop those agency skills. That's where we learn when to speak up, when to use your voice, when to channel all of that energy in the right way. And I think it's really important to give kids opportunities and guardrails for how to do that in productive ways through that kind of experience that you're providing. Secondly, you mentioned that every student has an adult assigned to them and that adult stays with them. So can you say a little bit more about that? When you say that feels overwhelming for 80,000 students to have an adult assigned to them. So if I'm a student in Nashville, like who might be assigned to me? Is it a classroom teacher or could it be anyone?
It could be anyone. It could be the front office staff, it could be a counselor, it could be a social worker. Our teams are empowered. We're making those connections with our students in a very intentional way, but to empower, and as you said, to build student agency and building those relationships across the board. We also have implemented, and Ebenezer, feel free to talk about this. We have a student system where students can go in daily and tell us how they're feeling. And that information goes directly to their navigator. And if needed, it's flagged for us to push in some additional supports immediately. But that's our goal. We don't want to wait a full day or days to make sure our students have what they need or opportunities to speak up, to advocate for themselves. And so we, again, any and every adult is assigned a student as a navigator, and we're giving our students additional tools to make sure that if your time and moment right now is not your navigator reaching out, you can reach out to them as well.
Great. And Ebenezer, I'd love to hear from your perspective as a student about those kinds of supports.
Yeah, like Dr. Battle mentioned, for example, I've had a personal navigator since 8th grade, and he's my AP US history teacher now, and he's been with me for the past almost 5 years, and he'll be with me next year too. And he's basically the person that I go to when I have any problem. And this has been, since 8th grade, and it's the same thing now. And we've developed this relationship where I depend on him as the person that's always there for me. And I know that, especially with concerns with not even just academics, but like you said, with social emotional learning, if there's anything that I'm feeling discomfort with, he's the person that I would go to. And even now, it's become much easier for students to approach these navigators, because sometimes, like I think you mentioned earlier, some students are quiet. It might be a little hard for them to approach someone and explain to them what their problems are. But now they've developed this program called Zone to Grow, where students can go on a specific website. They can write down like a private journal of how they're feeling, and that directly goes to their navigator, and that navigator can look at that. And if he sees anything that he should, intervene in and help that student out with, he does. Or if he needs to, that also goes to the district, so the district can also intervene. And there's just a lot of methods or a lot of tools for students to be able to reach out to someone that can help them. I saw this during the pandemic, when my navigator would consistently call me every week, make sure that I'm feeling safe. And he did that for 19 other students, because he was also their navigator. And every time he would call me, you could see that the questions that he was asking me come from empathy, and he's trying to understand where I am right now as a student because of that pandemic. And he not only asks about, do you need anything? Like, he even asks, do you need paper towels? Do you need anything in your house that I can help you out with? And he says, do you need anybody to talk to? And that's someone that's very important that a student should have in their life, someone that they can always interact with and always depend on.
Wow. I mean, this is an amazing example. And Dr. Battle, I'm sure a lot of our audience members are wondering, like, what kind of professional learning was provided to the adults in Nashville to be able to be an effective navigator and an effective mentor, especially if each adult, including front office staff, has responsibility for 20 students. How do you prepare them for that role?
Yes, I think really what's helped us is grounding this in every student known. It just being very clear that we have to have structures in place. And so while we've invested a lot in our academic and social emotional learning integration, part of that investment has been around professional learning. We are training all of our staff members. Of course, again, any staff member can serve as a navigator. So everyone has had access to training around how to be effective as a navigator. We provide ongoing support. So weekly, we have weekly supports. We also have quarterly supports. As Ebenezer mentioned, we've coached navigators on how to show empathy, what types of questions you should be asking. We also provide kind of question starters based upon trends we're seeing as a district. Now, we need more information here. We're hearing from our students. We're seeing this in our data. And so we provide additional guides for our navigators to know where to start so they don't feel alone and are trying to navigate this by themselves. I did leverage my director's cabinets early on when we first rolled out our Navigator program to just ask them, because as a director, you want to make sure it doesn't just feel like something else,
Right.
but that it's really intentional and integrated in the work that we're doing. And overwhelmingly, from my support staff, from my support hub staff to my teachers, to my students, everyone saw the value in having those intentional connections with our students. So we're continuing on with our professional learning. We are also requiring some professional development, even this summer, to deepen our practice around navigators because they're here to stay. Our students have told us that it has built their confidence, that it's helping them navigate and again, create that agency and empowering them to make sure they have what they need to be successful.
That's amazing. And I think, right now there's a lot of conversations around mental health and making sure that we are providing our students with the supports that they need. And to what you're doing is really making sure that you are providing that environment where kids feel safe, they feel known, they feel cared for, they feel loved, they feel like someone's paying attention to them, which we know is a critical mitigator against the effects of stress and trauma. But if students do present some serious challenges, we can't rely necessarily on teachers to be mental health experts, right? Their job is to create that warm, inclusive environment. What kind of guidance do they have or supports do they have if they need to get additional expertise involved?
Well, fortunately, we have a structure by which teams meet frequently to share those concerns. So we do leverage our MTSSB model, multi-tier systems of support model to make sure, and our academic supports, to make sure that if we're seeing concerns, if there are some gaps in services, that can be brought to the table, shared with what we call a collaborative team, conferencing team, to connect students to the right resources. And in emergency situations, we respond immediately. We've partnered with lots of our local providers as well to make sure that those supports are available daily to our schools. And as you've mentioned, I've served previously as a teacher, principal, and many other roles. And some of the gaps have been that those resources, those experts are not always available. And so we've partnered really closely locally with our providers to make sure that we have those experts in our buildings and a part of those collaborative teams to make sure we're responsive to our students.
That's great. And we agree that partnerships with community partners are critically important to provide those additional supports, and that we are not over relying on teachers to sort of bear everything at their feet. They have a lot on their plates for sure. We only have about 15 minutes left in the hour, so I'd like to look and see some of the questions that are coming in and make sure that we can actually hear from folks who are listening. So let's, here's a quick one. It says, how often do you have meetings with student leaders? So Ebenezer, why don't you take that one? How often are you meeting with the administrators?
So I have the routine board member meetings that I go to, which is the second Tuesday of every month. And outside of that, I know Dr. Battle's board cabinet meets every Thursday, and I'm always sent an invite to attend to talk about my opinions if I feel like there's anything that we should be talking about. But outside of that, I also have direct communication with almost every single board member, Dr.
Wow.
Battle, and almost all of her team members. And they always send me emails whenever they see something that they thought I might even be interested in. So not only do we have that, direct professional relationship, we also have that relationship where they're always consistently helping me. They always, ask me if everything's going okay, if I have too much on my schedule. So on the professional level, like I said earlier, we have the every 2 weeks or every second Tuesday of the month. We also have the cabinet board meetings, and Dr. Battle mentioned earlier, representatives from each school come to us, almost all board meetings, and they give us a small presentation beforehand just to explain what's going on there in their school or specific programs that they're in. And then with Anjali and me, we also have a direct communication with almost every member of the district that normally works along with us.
Great, thank you. And it looks like there's a lot of questions in the chat about this Navigator system. They're asking if this is a specific program or did you create it? Is there a process for matching navigators to students and providing training? Dr. Battle, is there some resources about your Navigator program? I think we already have some teed up to share with this audience, but can you just kind of dig a little deeper on how does this work? Did the teachers get extra compensation, or is there specific training? Did you guys create this program? How does this work?
Yeah, we created this program. Our Chief of Strategy, Carrie Randolph, has been leading this work on behalf of the district. And I think if you talk to her about this particular program and our accelerating scholars, she will talk about all the energy and time that we spent creating it from ground up. And so it's not something that we were able to take off the shelf. We just had to be thoughtful about the needs of our learning community. We needed to establish our why behind it, because as you are kind of referencing in that question, to support over 80,000 students in this way and 14,000 employees connecting them, it takes lots of structures and alignment around what we're trying to accomplish. And so now we have our student management system that houses all of our navigators. We can go in at any point in time and see who the navigators are, but it's been a work in progress. And it's taken a lot of initial groundwork to make sure that we could get it up and running. But we do have resources. We share information all the time about the Navigator program, and we're happy to share additional information as needed.
Oh, that's great to hear, because there is a buzz in the chat and in the Q&A saying we would love to learn more about the Navigator program. And it looks like there's also some concern that some of the teachers themselves could use a navigator. Can you talk a little bit about how you support your teachers' own self-care and social emotional learning so that they are not feeling overwhelmed by this?
Absolutely. That is definitely a great question and a part of our plan. So we've done a few things. We recognize as well, our teachers, our educators, our support staff have been asked to do a lot, and always have been, but over the last few years, we've definitely layered in some additional responses needed to support all of our students. And let me just be the first to say, every one of my staff members, my team members have stepped up and met the charge, because it was what was best for our students. But we also have to be mindful about their needs as well. And so our health and wellness benefits team have come together. We have constantly surveyed our teachers and gotten their feedback, the director's cabinet, around the needs of our staff. So everything from webinars and small group sessions and individual support sessions, we're providing within our district. And of course, we're also partnering with others. But we also started a frequent check-in with all of our team members. So every teacher and staff member and support hub leader receives a text message from the support hub to check in frequently. And we typically just ask, how are you? What are your needs? How can we better support? And we use that information to guide our next steps. There is an opportunity to identify who you are if there's some immediate needs. And so that gives us additional information. But just like our students, when we're thinking about every student known, we have to know our team members and their needs as well, because if we pour into them, we know that they're more available to pour into our students. So we're trying to be intentional from the health and wellness side of things, but also just that connection, building those relationships and making sure we have the most up-to-date information to be responsive as a district.
Great. And the system that people are like checking in on, sort of, Ebenezer, you described reaching out to your navigator, or the system that you described where you would say how you were feeling and it gets routed to your navigator. What is that system?
So the first one is just verbally, I could tell my navigator how I'm feeling, because we meet every Wednesday too.
Wow.
And on those Wednesdays, we do, even if there's nothing for me to talk about, we do these lessons that he has prepared, where we talk about how I can be better at some of the things that might be going around my life, and how I can handle the stress. So for example, if the ACT is coming up, or if there's an exam coming up, my navigator takes that into account, and so do the other navigators, because I think they have the same lesson plan, and they try to help us deal with stress that we might be feeling, or some academic pressure that we might be feeling. And then another is at the beginning of every class on Wednesday, my navigator tells me to log on to the website I mentioned earlier, which was Sown to Grow. And on there, I talk about how I'm feeling, how my past week has been. And then I'm asked one specific question that the navigator would want to know. So for example, I think last week's might have been, what is something that you're grateful every day for? And I would answer that. And I'm not just, kept in a box to answer that question. I could talk about anything I want, but that's just something to help me formulate my thoughts.
Interesting. Wow, it sounds like a really robust system that has great benefits. And is it like an advisory class that you're in on Wednesdays where that interaction happens, or a homeroom?
Yeah, so it would be, we call it our advisory class, and it's the name would be advisory, but it has the same features as what Dr. Battle explained earlier, which was the Navigators program.
And Dr. Battle, is that curriculum something that the district has developed, or is it a purchased curriculum? There's some questions about the lesson plans.
So the Navigators scripts and support we create in-house. As Ebenezer is mentioning, the Sown to Grow program, we work hand in hand with them on any specific questions that we want to ask. We also use a system called POSIP as well. And we work with both of those partners to make sure that the questions we're asking are specific and targeted to Metro Nashville Public Schools. So we meet with them frequently, and we talk about our data and what we're hearing and the feedback we received from the last set of questions. And we just build it to make sure that it is unique to us and meeting the needs of our students and our staff.
Gotcha. Great. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I think, Ebenezer, I'm going to direct this one to you. In terms of your leadership in the district, do you have a sort of formal process for reporting back to the student body? And like, is that sort of done a little bit more informally, like you were describing earlier?
So the beautiful part of what I do is that it's more, there's both sides. There are some times where we have formal ways of communicating with the student body, which Angelina and I do. She has a large reach through her social media, and she posts on there and lets students know what's going on with the board. She's very on that stuff, and that's why I love having her as a partner, because she has the best ways to communicate with such large groups of people. And then the other is, as being people that work with the board, we also have that ability to be in other aspects of the community too. So I could disperse a large amount of information to the Ethiopian community, for example, whenever we have events that are happening. So our board member elections are coming up in a couple months. I had the ability to give a small speech to the Ethiopian community last week, telling them how it's important for them to vote, because they're picking out the people that I'm going to be working with. And we have different systems made for each topic that we work with each other, me and Angeli, and with Dr. Battle and her team too.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to wrap up. I do have one last question for each of you. We have a lot of folks who are just so eager to learn from you. Ebenezer, we'll start with you. Is there something that you've learned, and this is a direct question here, is there something that you've learned in your first year that you really feel like would be helpful that you would have been helpful to know at the outset? Is there anything like a lesson learned or something that our audience can learn from your experience, so that as they think about engaging young people in these ways, what's some advice that you would give them of something that you've learned?
The one thing that I'd mention is that going to all of these board meetings, I've had that pleasure of meeting with a lot of students from different high schools. And some of these students are their English is their second language. They just began learning English, or they're coming from a program that might not necessarily having to do with academics, but is still part of the MNPS. And it just showed me how important it is for us to focus on reaching out to those students, because if you're a 5'5" guy and you're in middle school, sometimes it might feel like your voice doesn't matter. No matter, even if people are coming to you and telling you that your voice matters, it still might feel like it doesn't, because you might not see all of the methods in which you can talk about how you feel. But if you have adults, like I have Dr. Battle, whose main goal, like earlier, is to make every student known, and you hear that consistently, and you know that you're in an environment where you can speak however you want to in a comfortable, in a comfortable setting, then you have that ability to grow into that leadership position. So the one thing that I would mention to those that have joined us today is that they have to be consistent with how they approach students. They have to make sure that, not to give up. Even if students feel like, even if they feel like those students are pushing back, it's their job to make sure that those students are placed in an environment where they can be pushed to grow into that leadership position or any other position that student might want to apply for.
Awesome, thank you. And there's a lot of comments in the chat about trying to clone both of you. Dr. Battle, any last words of wisdom for folks who are trying to get these things off the ground in their districts?
My words of encouragement is be intentional. We are intentional about our integration and building our structures that speak to every student known. And we are relentless in our pursuit of every student being known, but we know we're on a path of continuous improvement as well. Your investments speak to your priorities. And with that, I'll just say be intentional, be strategic, and our goal is, again, not by accident, but by design. By design, we want to make sure that we're feeding our students, setting the conditions so that they can thrive. And as we've been talking about today, by elevating student voice and engagement.
Well, thank you both so much. We are going to share some key takeaways right now, and we're going to be following up with everyone with a recording of this and some additional resources. Some key takeaways we want to make sure everybody hears is that we know that educators can honor and elevate a broad range of student perspectives and experiences, just like Ebenezer just said. Even those kids who don't feel like they have a voice, getting those voices out is so important. And those opportunities can happen at all grade levels. The next one is that there are actually policies in place that can be in place that can promote this. So policymakers can provide guidance, resources, time, money, evidence-based approaches that will help elevate youth voice, and really partnering with our students in reviewing the data on the survey data, the climate data, the discipline data is such an important mechanism to really getting the best solutions to the challenges that you're facing. Next, we know that student leadership, both in classrooms and school-wide, and as we heard today, even in the community, can allow for meaningful conversations about complex topics that students really want to see change and have an investment in seeing those outcomes. So it's really important for all of us to be doing that.